made my bed, and now I'll lie in it. Because today I will die. But I will not die an unfulfilled man. I will die a meaningful man, a great warrior. And my message will live on forever. Now do it. In South Central Chile, a baby was born by the name of Galvarino. And Galvarino would grow up to have an infatuation with fighting, to be a great Mapuche warrior that would protect his territory against any invaders. He knew he had to become tough, strong, and most importantly, to never show fear or pain. Now, the age of when he started training is unknown, but in the 1500s, you can start training to become a warrior as young as 10 years old. He'd have to demonstrate bravery, skills with weapons, and gain respect within the community. Mapuche warriors were known for their physical prowess, requiring training in running, jumping, and swimming, which would be vital for survival. They were required to be excellent in handling traditional weapons, such as a long wooden spear, a basham, which was a throwing weapon, kind of like the one you might see in the Olympics. Talk about an origin story. And a lira, which was a short wooden club. I guess the equivalent for this weapon would be a wooden baseball bat. Mapuche warriors also needed to be skilled hunters and trackers. This would allow them to become resourceful and able to provide for themselves and their families, so that whatever situation they may find themselves in, they'd be able to survive. And Galvarino was thriving and was on his way to becoming the next great warrior. But just having great physical endurance and excellent weaponry skills wouldn't be enough. To become a warrior, the next thing he would have to do is demonstrate bravery. Mapuche warriors were to have a test of courage, such as participating in raids or defending their territory. This would help demonstrate their commitment to their people. But why did he want to be a Mapuche warrior, and who were they even fighting against? Well, there were three groups that controlled the lands of Chile, called Pacanche, Hiliche, and Mapuche. They were divided, but joined forces to defend against the Spanish conquistadors, who were led by Governor Garcia Hurtado de Mendoza. The Spanish set out to expand and take the land from the Mapuche, which would eventually lead to the Battle of Las Lomias. The root of this feud traces all the way back to 1536, over a conflict of the Noble and Itita rivers. The Spanish wanted more land, but the Mapuche refused to give it to them. And 17 years later, the first battle of the Arauco War was commenced. The fight was bloody, but led to a decisive victory for the Mapuche. As usual, Galvarino couldn't sleep, so he often sharpened his skills with his knife, throwing accuracy, or hand-to-hand combat, when suddenly he feels that something is just off. It's late night and there are guards standing watch, but still, he just got this weird feeling. So he put his back to his hut, so that if an attack were to occur, he wouldn't be caught off guard. When suddenly war cries from the Spanish rained down. It was an ambush, but Galvarino was ready, and with his weapon already in hand, he began attacking his enemies, as his fellow Mapuche warriors quickly awoke to help fend off the Spanish. When out of nowhere, a stray arrow just hit Galvarino right in the shoulder, and miraculously, he didn't even flinch. This just knocked him off balance for a second, but in theory, that second should have cost him his life, because he's in an active fight. But since he was already outside practicing with his weapons, they were just conveniently on the ground right in front of him. So in the same motion of falling backward, he reached down, grabbed his knife, and threw it right at his attacker with pinpoint accuracy, hitting him right between the eyes. And as this was happening, he heard another loud war cry. So with this arrow still stuck in his chest, he readied himself for the next wave of attackers that he assumed was coming. But it was the opposite. That sound that he heard was slightly different. It wasn't for the Spanish to continue fighting. It was for them to retreat. The Mapuche warriors had completely disposed of the Spaniards' attack. When the first wave of attackers attempted their ambush, they weren't expecting a guard to be facing in that direction. And in reality, there wasn't a guard in that direction. That was just Galvarino, mastering his skills and giving the Mapuche the time they needed to repel this attack. And so there he was, Galvarino, with an arrow pointing out of his chest. He just looked at it, reached up, and yanked it out, again, showing no emotion. But now he had an open wound, so he would have to seal it shut, using a process called cauterization, which was a process where a heated tool like an iron or knife is used to burn and seal a wound shut, stopping it from bleeding and potentially getting infected. This was a method that was used in ancient times. The only problem is, it's extremely painful, and his fellow Mapuche warriors saw him doing this, and when he was done, it was the same thing, no pain reaction. Galvarino was just different, and it was this fearless act of bravery, combat excellence, and never quit mentality that led him to not only become a warrior, but to become one of the leaders of the Mapuche forces. The Spanish were closing in, and it was time for them to protect their homeland. And then suddenly Galvarino charged in, but it was clear that they were unmatched. The Mapuche had the numbers, but the Spanish had steel armor and better weapons. But Galvarino was undeterred. He slashed one, he slashed another, and another, when suddenly, a rock thrown by a Spaniard knocked Galvarino on the head, and everything went black. He was only out a few moments, but that was enough for the Spanish to get the upper hand. He looked to his right and saw his people getting slaughtered. He looked to his left and saw more of the same. So he gets up, grabs his weapon, and gets back in the action. But Galvarino was fatigued, and his vision was beginning to play tricks on him. That head injury was taking its toll. For every one soldier, he was seeing three. So he decided to hit the one in the middle. So again, he slashed him and slashed him, but it was in a losing effort. The Spanish were closing in, and eventually, Galvarino was overpowered and forced to surrender. Hundreds of Mapuche were killed, and over 150 were taken prisoner. They'd have a trial, but it wasn't much of a trial at all, and their punishment was something straight out of a horror film. I promise on the soul of my fellow warriors that as long as there's breath in my lungs, I'll never stop fighting. There I was, standing with my fellow warriors, being marched forward to the unknown, hearing the sounds of chops and screams. When I made it outdoors, I found that they were chopping off the right hand of all soldiers, and commanders such as myself were to have both hands chopped off. A wise decision. When it was my turn, I vowed not to show any fear or pain. I only said, "You better kill me, because you can take my hands, but I'll still rip you apart with my teeth." And in one swift motion, my right hand was gone. And I kid you not, I felt no pain. Only rage and defiance ran through my veins. I offered my left, and in one swift motion, it was gone, and the rage I felt was unholy. Galvarino was completely mutilated, and this was all a part of Governor Mendoza's plan to win the war. It was simple. Step 1, find a leader. Step 2, you have to destroy him, break his will. He'll never fight again. And step 3, send him back home to his people mutilated, so that they'd know what would happen if they continued fighting. But what the governor didn't know was, Galvarino was truly a one of one. And after this evil act of disrespect, the war was now far from over. After the mutilation, Galvarino and his fellow Mapuche warriors traveled back to their village, and when their people saw what happened to them, their immediate thought was rage. But their second thought was, how do we move forward? What they ended up doing was, for every mutilated soldier, there was a sort of assistant soldier to help them complete basic tasks. And so the days would go on, and every single day, it was the same thing out of Galvarino. We need to fight back. This is just the beginning. They'll do this to all of us. We must fight back. So just imagine, here's a man with no hands, and every day, he's saying, we need to fight back, and that he'll lead us in battle once again. And when you ask him how he's gonna do it, he looks you dead in your eyes, and as serious as a heart attack says, I'll rip them apart with my teeth. You can't even begin to understand what that level of fearless determination does for a group of people, let alone warriors. Eventually, Galvarino would speak with General Kabulakan, and the attack date was set for November 30th, exactly 1 month after the mutilation, a sort of poetic justice. But when the date was set, Galvarino told me about his real plan. He was going to turn himself into a human weapon. When the sun rose the next morning, Galvarino and his fellow warrior took knives and lashed them onto his wrists, making sure the ropes were tight enough so they'd stay in place in battle. The pain would have been excruciating, but at this point, you'd begin to wonder if he could even feel pain at all. The plan was to launch a sneak attack and ambush the Spanish. Galvarino and his fellow warriors would creep through the forest, making sure to stay hidden. They would watch the Spaniards from the tree line. There were only several sets of patrol, but they'd be taken care of if everything went as planned. The key was to attack quickly, before the Spanish could fire their cannons and rally their soldiers, but the attack was premature. And not all the Mapuche forces were in place when the first warriors ran into battle. But there was no going back now. The Spanish couldn't believe what they were seeing. He looked like a human killing machine. But nonetheless, they mobilized quickly and used their weapons to fend off the Mapuche. But Galvarino had vengeance in his eyes, slashing and slashing, when all of a sudden, he heard a loud. There was just this array of smoke. You couldn't see anything, when out of nowhere, this madman appeared out of the mist with knives for hands. It was Galvarino, still undeterred, slashing and slashing. It was as if he was more powerful than ever. But behind him were wounded men. And once again, his fight would be in a losing effort. But if he was gonna go out, he was gonna go out with a bang. He just started running, sprinting, right toward the enemy, with the look of determination on his face, as the shocked Spanish soldier readied his arrow and fired. But missed. He quickly got another, aimed and fired, but missed again, and it was already too late. Galvarino had closed the distance and slashed him, but he wasn't done yet. He had eyed a tree that was recently chopped down, and knowing that there was probably a marksman aiming at him, he did the unthinkable. He ran full speed, jumped on the tree, and leaped off it. The marksman aimed and fired, but missed. Galvarino was getting closer and closer to the encampment, so he's running and slashing, when suddenly, an arrow pierced through his chest. But it was as if he didn't feel anything at all. But then another arrow hit him, and another, and everything went black. When he awoke, he was chained to a bed. He put up a vicious fight, but it wasn't enough. And this time, the Spanish had accepted that Galvarino was too dangerous and planned his execution. But you gotta think, if the Spanish had a warrior like Galvarino on their side, they win the war with ease. So they tried to convince him to switch sides. Join us, they said. But he calmly responded, I'd rather die before I become one of you. But that's suicide, they said. And at this, Galvarino sat back in his prison cell and said, I made my bed, and now I'll lie in it. Because today I will die. But I will not die an unfulfilled man. I will die a meaningful man, a great warrior. And my message will live on forever. Now do it. If you couldn't tell, those pictures were of Galvarino, whose story continues to inspire people all around the world, and he's often referred to as the real-life Wolverine. It would take over 99 years after Galvarino's death, but eventually, the Mapuche did win the war. But it'd be reasonable to assume that in that time they may have just wanted to give up and let the Spanish take over, and that's when they'd be reminded of the true story of Galvarino.